1924?
No, 25.
My grandmother was born July 15th, 1925, in Vilnius, in what was then Poland. She learned how to read at a very young age. And one of the stories that she used to tell me was about two Polish spinster sisters who lived in her apartment building. They had this immense private library, and they lured her into their house one day and lent her a book. Now, I don't remember what book. I know she told me, but I didn't write it down. But this book sparked something inside her, turned her into a reader. The sisters kept feeding her one book after another, after another, after another. Ellen Bialystok says one speculation about the 4.5-year difference is that being bilingual helps to build up something that scientists call the, quote, cognitive reserve. Think of it almost like brain armor. Like all those things they tell us are good for the mind, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, learning another language contributes to this theoretical neurological weaponry, the cognitive reserve, but with loads and loads of caveats, says another neuropsychologist, Thomas Bach, at the University of Edinburgh. He was excited by Bialystok's study, and it seemed only natural. Why? Thomas, first, how many languages do you speak?
Polish, German, English, French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese.
Bach replicated Bialystok's study in Hyderabad, India, and he got the same results. But he's equally in the dark as to exactly why they have found this 4.5-year difference. He does, however, have a theory. Bilinguals, in every interaction, have to choose which language to speak. This is exercising something called the frontal executive function.
The big difference in dementia is not so much about remembering things in terms of knowledge, it's about accessing this information. So the bilinguals might also have, let's say, problems in forgetting something, but they will be better accessing it because of their better frontal executive functions.
When I asked Bach my original question, why has my grandmother chosen to fall back into one language and not another, he was perplexed. There isn't much, if any, scientific study as to why one language takes hold and other languages are lost to dementia. However, there are many, many anecdotes and case studies, he told me. Oh, and that noise you're about to hear in the background, that's his multilingual daughter. She only speaks 4 languages.
The oldest rule, which has been described by a Frenchman called Ribot in 19th century, is that people revert to their original language. A few years later, something else described by Pitres, also in France, and he said, well, it might be the language which is mainly spoken for the last 10-20 years of the life.
For my grandmother, it isn't. It isn't exactly her first language either. Her first language is Polish, and then later, when the Russians occupied Vilnius in 1939, Russian. Another theory, Bach told me, was that a person might revert to a language that they spoke during a moment in their life, in which they felt immense joy, or satisfaction, or comfort. I can't imagine that 1939 was a particularly calm time in my grandmother's life. She was 15, Europe was on the brink of war, and not to mention the hormonal war beginning inside her. But then perhaps this was one of the last times of her life when she truly felt comfort, when her family was still together, still in their same apartment building, with the old Polish ladies lending her books. Perhaps this was when she started reading the Russians, in Russian.
There are so many different aspects which play a role, and cognitive as well as emotional. So it's not that we are kind of making just, computer decisions. The attitude that we have, the beliefs, the hopes.
Memory is unreliable at the best of times, and why our brain chooses to latch on to one thing or another, one language or another. There's something in that mystery that, and I don't mean to be dramatic, but it's almost poetic. When I think about my grandmother's deteriorating mind, her memories evaporating, of course she's retreated back into a language and a moment before the disappearing in her life began. For the world, I'm Nina Korsinski.
This is just a snippet of Nina's story. To listen to the entire piece, including more details on Bach's dementia study in India, subscribe to the World in Words podcast on iTunes. is The World.
The University of Miami invites ambitious business professionals and seasoned executives to learn more about the Miami MBA. With both weekend and weekday evening programs, as well as distance learning, you can earn the Miami MBA without interrupting your career. The next classes begin in January. Learn more at an MBA preview event this Saturday, October 17th at the Coral Gables campus, where you can meet current MBA students and the MBA admissions team. More information about the MBA preview event this Saturday, October 17th, is at miamimba.com.
Hi, Margaret Werman. Yang Fenglan moved to Tanzania from China in the 1970s. She became a pillar of the business community, but now
she's been accused of smuggling 700 tusks from elephants in Tanzania to China in the past 15 years.
the story of the so-called Ivory Queen coming up on The World.
BBC News with Marion Marshall. The Pentagon says U.S. military transport planes have dropped more than 100 pallets of supplies, including ammunition, grenades and rockets, to Syrian rebels fighting against the Islamic State group. Officials said 50 tons of equipment had been dropped into the northern Syrian province of Hasaka. EU foreign ministers have called for an immediate end to Russian airstrikes in Syria. In a statement, they said the Russian operation could prolong the conflict and undermine attempts to find a political solution. United Nations envoy to Syria has meanwhile warned that any military escalation could lead to the partition of the country. The authorities in Turkey say they're close to identifying one of the two suicide bombers who attacked a peace rally on Saturday, killing nearly 100 people. The Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoglu, said investigators were awaiting the results of DNA tests. The full-time police guard outside Ecuador's embassy in London, where the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has taken refuge since 2012, is being stopped on grounds of cost. Mr. Assange is trying to avoid extradition to Sweden, where he faces an allegation of rape. Police in London say they still intend to detain him. An Israeli soldier has been stabbed on a bus in Jerusalem in the fourth knife attack in the city on Monday. The police said the attacker was an Arab, but didn't specify whether he was a Palestinian. Earlier, 2 police officers were attacked and 2 young Israelis were stabbed and seriously wounded in a settlement in eastern Jerusalem. Islamist militants in Tunisia have killed 2 soldiers and wounded 4 others in clashes near the Algerian border. The European Union is to suspend sanctions against Belarus for 4 months, despite concerns about the conduct of Sunday's presidential election. The German foreign minister said the election appeared to have been less repressive than previous ones. BBC News.
The World is brought to you by Public Radio International and by Soundworks.org, offering perspectives on events and cultures around the globe with the world's daily podcast and the Studio 360 podcast. Subscribe at Soundworks.org or iTunes.
I'm Margaret Werman, and this is The World. We're a co-production of the BBC World Service, PRI, and WGBH here in Boston. We've seen the heat Hillary Clinton has been taking for not being spontaneous enough on the campaign trail, for appearing too stiff and not being herself. But at least she's not facing questions about why, as a woman, she's even in the race. That's what many women politicians in Japan still have to deal with, and worse. Last year, a representative in the Tokyo Assembly became the focus of a sexual harassment scandal that rocked the country. Reporter Naomi Gingold checks in to find out what's changed for her and for other women politicians there.
The resumes of most politicians do not read like Ayaka Shiomura's. She graduated from a junior college and then worked in the entertainment world. Later, she studied abroad and says that experience really changed her. Before,
いるかいないかわからないような女の子だったんですね。自己主張全然しない。
I was the kind of girl you wouldn't know if I were there or not. I didn't assert myself at all. But being abroad, she learned how to say what needed to be said. And since coming back, people often tell her,
強いとはよく言われます。負けないねって言われますね。
You're really strong. You stand your ground. Shiomura then became a scriptwriter for TV and radio. At one point, she worked on a radio show with a segment on politics, and there, she started to meet and talk to politicians. And she realized that if she wanted better policies for the issues she cared about, she would have to run. In 2013, she was elected to the Tokyo Municipal Assembly as a member of the Young Your Party. Her job was hard from the beginning.
1年生議員だから、若いから、女性だからっ
because I'm first term, because I'm young, because I'm a woman. From a lot of perspectives, there's still a lot of prejudice and discrimination in the assembly, and especially as a young woman, I'm taken lightly and I don't feel respected. Last summer, Shiomura addressed the assembly for the first time, talking about the need to do more to support working women who have or want to have kids in order to bring up the country's low birth rate. In the middle of her speech, members of Prime Minister Abe's ruling LDP party started heckling her, with taunts of, "Wouldn't it be better if you just hurried up and got married? Maybe you can't have babies." On TV, viewers saw shaken Shiomura quickly finish and dab her eyes. Heckling and even sexual harassment is not uncommon in the Tokyo Assembly, Japanese politics, or Japan. But Shiomura did something unusual. She asked the Assembly to identify and punish those responsible. They didn't. They wouldn't, and the issue blew up in international and then Japanese media. Some pointed to Shiomura's past, hosting a late-night TV show wearing only a bathing suit, and said, "This kind of woman, she deserves it." But most public reaction towards the hecklers was harsh. Finally, one LDP politician claimed responsibility and apologized on national TV. But no others came forward, and the Assembly voted down a call to identify the rest. Lawmakers created a commission to look into gender discrimination in the Assembly, but that commission hasn't produced anything yet. And now, a year on, Shiomura has been ostracized by everyone. Not a single legislator will work with her.
話もしない人も多いかな。小学校の時代によくあるような話しちゃダメよみたいな感じになってる人も。
It's kind of like what you see in elementary school. Some people have told me in secret that if they're seen talking to me, they will be treated badly. Because she is seen as the one who caused problems, who made a big fuss over nothing. Shiomura says the message from all of this is,
女性が目立つとどうなのか分かってんのっていうメッセージだと思いましたね。
if a woman stands out, do you see what'll happen?
それは相手にされてないっていうこと自体が意味がよくわからない。
No one will work with her? I don't even know what that means. It's not true. Hiroshi Shigehara is with the majority LDP party in the Tokyo Assembly.
同じですよ。全ての議員は同じように平等に扱われてると思いますけど。
The LDP treats every member of the Assembly equally, according to the rules, and everyone has the opportunity to speak. So maybe it's not surprising that Shiomura and others question the LDP's ability to actually change and their sincerity.
Koza is the best solution to increase women's representation in Japan.
Professor Mikiko Eto studies women in politics in Japan. Right now, Japan has the lowest representation of women in politics in the developed world. That's why both she and Shiomura think a quota is the best way to go. But Eto says that kind of legislation is basically dead in the water.
日本ではクォーター導入するのはすっごく難しい。
It'd be really hard to introduce a quota here as long as the LDP is in power, because they're completely against it. And the LDP has only briefly lost power twice since the end of World War II. There's a lot Ayaka Shiomura still wants to accomplish in her job, but she says,
大きなものに立ち向かうっていうのは限界がある。
there's a limit to how much I can fight against something so big. She says the point of getting elected was not so that she could be a politician. It was so that she could do something for the issues she cared about. If no one will work with her, how much can she do? For the World, I'm Naomi Gingold, Tokyo, Japan.
Well, here's a woman with undisputed clout. Yang Feng-glan has been called the Queen of Ivory, the most notorious trafficker of elephant tusks in the world, and now she's been caught. The 66-year-old grandmother was arrested by Tanzanian police. This is a country in East Africa that's been the axis for elephant poaching in the whole continent. Ruth McLean has been covering this story for the Times of London. What can you tell us about Yang Feng-glan, Ruth? Who is she and where is she from?
She's been living in Tanzania since the 1970s, and she's quite a respectable-seeming businesswoman. She's the owner of a very popular restaurant in Dar es Salaam. But underneath all that, she is accused of smuggling 700 tusks from elephants in Tanzania to China in the past 15 years.
Right, over a 15-year period. How long have the authorities been following her?
They've been following her for about a year. She was caught with ivory traveling through her kitchen of the restaurant that she ran. And then, they surrounded her house and waited for her. And eventually there was a high-speed car chase through the center of Dar es Salaam. And eventually, she had to stop and got out and put her hands up.
How big of a catch is she? I mean, is her arrest going to make a dent in the illegal ivory trade business?
Well, conservationists are saying that she's a very big catch indeed, and they hope that she's going to lead to a lot of other arrests as well. It's big money that we're talking about, millions and millions of dollars worth. Unfortunately, 700 tusks just means about 350 elephants. That's a very small amount compared to the number that have been poached. We're talking tens of thousands here. I mean, there's been about a 60% drop in elephants across Africa, and a lot of those have been killed in Tanzania, which is a huge safari destination and home to, significant populations.
And could we possibly see an increase in the elephant population now?
Maybe eventually this could lead to rising numbers of elephants again, but I don't think we should underestimate the poaching gangs either. They move very quickly. They're a bit like the drug gangs working in Latin America, and they find new people and new routes all the time. They have lots of money and they're well armed, and I don't know if this one arrest will be enough to really put them off.
Do we know who her buyers were? Were they artisans who do carving or traditional healers who claim tusk as medicinal properties?
We think probably both in China, but we're not sure. I mean, that's what the police is doing at the moment. They're trying to track the passage of this ivory through Africa to China, because ivory is a big status symbol in China. There's a growing middle class, and it's very fashionable in some circles to have a tusk or something beautiful made out of a tusk on your mantelpiece, for instance. There is some use of it in traditional Chinese medicine. That certainly does have an impact, but I think really it's the status symbol that conservationists are most worried about, because that's spreading and more people are getting to the level where they can afford to buy what is a very expensive product and a legal product.
Will she become an example for Tanzania and other African governments? I mean, is she going to face a stiff prosecution as a result of all this?
I think she may well. I mean, she faces 30 years in jail if she's convicted. That would take her to the age of 96 if she lives that long. It's a really good sign that Tanzania is actually starting to take this seriously. I mean, one of the criticisms that conservationists have leveled at Tanzania in particular is that officials have been accused of collaborating with the poaching gangs. There is allegedly a lot of corruption, and the fact that they are pursuing this prosecution now might mean that they're willing to take on the corrupt officials in Tanzania's government who are accused of being involved in and profiting from this trade.
Ruth McLean with the Times of London, thanks very much for telling us about Yang Fenglan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The debate over the hundreds of thousands of refugees and migrants entering Europe often gets reduced to dollars and cents. We can't afford to allow more people in when we can't employ the people already here. The people coming and what they've been through and why they're coming to Europe often get trumped by the money argument. But here's a story about a group of West Africans in Italy who, if given a work permit and some fresh milk, are showing locals just how they can contribute. Angelica Marin has a story from Rome.
Across the street from an auto repair shop, crates of zucchini, potatoes, lettuce, and tomatoes are on display at a kind of pop-up market.
Bit more, a little more. I can give them more.
That's Seydou, 26 years old, from Gambia. He gets giddy when shoppers fight for the remaining jars of his yogurt.
For these people, it's very good. My yogurt is very good. The yogurt is better. It's natural.
It's not just natural, or organic, or farm to table. This yogurt is a symbol of hope, made, jarred, and delivered by a group of West African immigrants. Their business idea came from far, far away, through a dangerous route.
From Gambia, Senegal, from Senegal to Mali, from Mali to Niger, from Niger to Libya, from Libya to Italy.
Seydou traveled 3,000 miles across the desert and sea to get to a country that pretty much allows African immigrants to do one job: brutal agricultural labor. But 7 years later, he's part of a successful cooperative, African yogurt delivered to homes, markets, and restaurants on bicycles. The founder of the operation, Suleiman Diarra, pulls up on one of the bikes. He's the one who saw the opportunity, put a skinny African cow on a yogurt label, and named the co-op. It's from the Bambara language of his native Mali.
Barikama. Progetto è stato chiamato Barikama. Che vuol dire
Barikama. The project was called Barikama, which means resilient. Resilient because it began with 2 people and 2 liters of milk a week. When we reached 200 liters a week, we decided to call ourselves Barikama because we had potential to grow. We got this far, facing all these problems, and we believe we can resist, grow, and help other people.
Suleiman says his first years in Italy were harsh. Like thousands others who came undocumented, Suleiman fell prey to agricultural exploitation in Italy's south, picking mandarins for 5 cents a case. He ended up in Rosarno, a town with a bad reputation for violence against immigrants. Seydou was also there, and other Africans who would become the Barikama team. Now they gather in a tiny dairy lab near a lake in the very pretty Roman countryside. Today, 2 of Suleiman's partners are on shift. Sheikh from Senegal, dressed in full cheese factory garb, along with rings and bracelets, and Ismail from Benin, a soft-spoken accountant with white glasses that keep steaming up from the heat. Sheikh pours organic milk into a steel tank. Ismail stirs it with a big wooden spoon. They say this yogurt has changed their lives. Here's Ismail.
We're really happy to carry on with this project because we're independent now. We don't have to beg anyone, and we're free to organize our own work without exploitation. We understand each other, and we do everything together.
Ismail had a good job in Italy, but he got laid off and lost his permit to stay. He went under the radar and kept working so he could support his family back in Benin. He became a day laborer in Rosarno. Sheikh had a visa to audition with a professional soccer team, but didn't make the cut. Rather than going home empty-handed, he stayed and picked tomatoes in Rosarno. Sheikh remembers that time bitterly.
Those who know Rosarno know it's a racist place. If an African buys an espresso at a cafe, they give it to you in a plastic cup. Instead, they serve it to white people in a proper espresso cup. You can't walk around at night because people throw rocks at you and drivers slam the doors of their cars open to hit you. Total racism.
In Rosarno, migrants live in shacks without running water. They work 12 hours a day for no more than $25, and a big chunk of it goes to local recruiters. African day laborers who flee their countries to escape poverty, not wars, swarm the Italian coast and countryside without a chance of ever obtaining asylum. Experts say Italy treats them as if they were a problem. The farm owners are perfectly happy to exploit them as cheap labor. Suleiman says the Italian system is totally unfair, but Italian people, for the most part, have been supportive.
Everything I lived through was bad, but also good, because I really understood the meaning of humanity. Always try to help the other, and give support to someone who doesn't have your same opportunities.
Like the woman who sponsored their first batch of milk, or the farmer who offers his professional dairy lab for free, not to mention the passionate yogurt customers.
Barikama.
It's all about Barikama, Suleiman says.
Barikama.
Resilience. For the world, I'm Angelica Marin, Rome.
This is The World.
The World is brought to you by Public Radio International with support from TIAA CREF, a global financial company that's created to serve and built to perform. You can learn more at TIAA.org.
You can advance your career in the healthcare industry with Florida Atlantic University's 15-month Executive Master of Health Administration program, starting January. The all-inclusive full-service program Executive Master of Health Administration includes Lean Six Sigma Green Belt certification and is offered on weeknights to accommodate busy working professionals. The GMAT is waived for qualified qualifying students. More information is available at fau.edu/MHA. That's fau.edu/MHA.
I'm Marco Werman, and you're with The World. Remember MH17? That was the Malaysian airliner flying between Amsterdam and Kuala Lumpur. It was shot out of the sky over eastern Ukraine last summer, 2014. All 298 people on board, mostly Dutch, died. Dutch investigators have been piecing together what happened, and they'll issue a long-awaited report tomorrow. My BBC colleague Anna Holligan has been speaking with some of the relatives and investigators. How'd they zero in on what caused the crash, Anna? I mean, this has been 15 months in review.
It has indeed, and as you say, long awaited by those relatives. It's important, Marco, to make it very clear from the outset that this is a technical report. So the more politically charged question of who did this, who was responsible, is being dealt with by a separate criminal investigation, which is expected to conclude by the end of this year. With regards to what caused the crash, that's the first question that's being addressed by the Dutch Safety Board, and they are expected to confirm the widely held suspicion that flight MH17 was most likely shot down by a Buk missile.
So a Buk missile, is that a Russian missile?
A Buk missile is a Russian-made missile indeed, but our understanding is that possibly both sides had access to these missiles. So the Dutch Safety Board report will probably stop before going into any kind of detail about where it came from or where it was fired from, because that could potentially prejudice the criminal investigation, and that will be hugely frustrating for the relatives who I've spoken to, because they want the whole story. They want to know not just what caused the crash, but who did it, who was responsible for those 298 deaths.
I gather investigators were also looking at the final moments of this flight. I mean, there are local farmers who saw people fall out of the sky in Ukraine that day, and what are the relatives expecting to hear from this report?
It's unimaginable to think what they might have seen there on the ground on that day. The Dutch Safety Board has told us that they are taking the unusual step of addressing this question after receiving a specific request from the next of kin. The families who I've been speaking to say they don't want to know if their relatives were conscious or aware in those final moments. They would rather not know about it. They would rather stick to what they imagine and what they've made peace with. So, for example, I've been speaking to a father of a 17-year-old girl. Her name is Elsmik divorced, and Hans, her father, says that she would have had her headphones in, she would have been watching a movie like Lord of the Rings, that she would have had her knees propped against the chair in front of her, and he thinks she just wouldn't have known anything, and that's how he's been able to make peace with it. I think it's highly unlikely that the report will reach any kind of conclusive conclusion as to whether the passengers and the crew were aware in those final moments. And the thing is, it's still a mystery, because the flight data recorder, the voice recorder, they all stopped at 13:20 GMT, and that's the time that the plane is thought to have been hit. So it may be that they just never know.
Yeah, such are the grim details that families don't want to hear about, but the things they do want to know. I mean, will we ever really know who did it? I mean, won't that be the real beginning of some kind of justice for the families?
That's the big question. Where did the missile come from? Who fired it? And that will indeed be the beginning of the judicial process. But so many questions are, for now, unanswered.
My colleague with the BBC, Anna Holligan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Finally today, some fun from Bermuda. The island is known for its beaches of ultrafine sand, perfect for building sand sculptures. Reporter Alex Gallifin was on the island for the 20th annual sand sculpture competition and tells us it was a great one.
The sculptures take place on Horseshoe Bay on the southern side of Bermuda.
First thing in the morning, organizers form the plots. Big piles of sand marked by 10 by 10 squares of string. That's what competitors get to work with. Jamal Hart is Master of Ceremonies. He works for Bermuda's Department of Youth, Sport and Recreation.
They're actually competing for a purse prize of $2,000, split amongst 4 different categories.
That's children, teenagers, an open category,
which consists of individuals, companies, organizations, and then we have the tourist category.
Before you ask, no, I did not compete, but Jamal still let me in on what makes a winning sand sculpture.
What the judges are looking for is originality, creativity, full use of the lot, and, detail. If you're saying you're going to build a mermaid and it looks more like a dinosaur, those things could go against you.
You get 7 hours to build something special. Hart has seen some quality work in his time.
The reigning champion, she produced one that was called a whale of a time, and it was a sperm whale fighting with a humpback whale.
The champion was back for this year's contest. Her name is Hannah Emerson Strang. Born and bred in Bermuda, Hannah knows this sand like the back of her hand. She begins by dumping buckets of water onto her plot.
Packing the sand until it sounds pretty much like that, like a solid black, and that's how you know your sand is hard packed and then fake to carve.
And to carve the sand, Hannah brings a cornucopia of tools.
In my bag of tricks is a spray bottle to wet down your detail, is an artist palette knife, because the sharp edge, you can use a steak knife, but your mother might not appreciate you stealing her knife. A chopstick, sharpened at one end, if I can. And my most favorite one is a straw to blow out the detail work.
After hours of work, the sculptures are complete, around 20 in total. There's a ship being consumed by a terrifying sea python. There's a memorial to Trayvon Martin. Emerson's effort, built with a partner, is a tribute to Cecil the Lion. The sand camera in front of his head carries her message.
The proper way to shoot animals is with a camera, not with a rifle. Like, really, dude?
Further up the beach, 2 local kids, Monty and Elsie, are showing off their literary effort.
Well, we did wild things, and we put down like a kind of quote that says, "Oh, please don't go, we'll eat you up, we love you so." Yeah, so this is the boat, and this is the waves, and there's Max, and his boat's got his name on it. And that's the big one. Yeah, so that's the king of the wild things.
And first place for breaking rights in the family category, we have on plot number 13, the wild things.
We got $250.
What are you going to do with it?
Well, we're going to go on a boat. We're going to go on a boat trip for 4 hours, and we're also going to get ice cream.
And no surprises in the overall category.
Treasures, not trophies. So save our wildlife.
No one begrudges Hannah another win, probably because she teaches sand sculpture too. Many of her competitors are also her students.
I'm so proud!
For the world, I'm Alex Gallifant, Bermuda. Don't forget to clean your shoes, Alex. That's all from us today at the Nan and Bill Harris Studios here at WGBH in Boston. Back with you tomorrow.
The World is a co-production of the BBC World Service, PRI, and WGBH Boston, supported by Nan and Bill Harris, committed to supporting objective, unbiased reporting on national and international issues. The PRI Trust for Innovation, which enables informed risk-taking in the creation of new content for public radio. Donors include the Rose Family Fund. By the United States-Japan Foundation, the Plowshares Fund, a global security foundation working to build a world where nuclear weapons will never be used again. By the PRI Ambassador Council, including Catherine Harris and the Heegard Foundation, John and Caroline Ballantyne, Blythe Brendan Mann Foundation, and Michael V. and Ann Cerisi. And by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, dedicated to the idea that all people deserve the chance to live healthy, productive lives. GatesFoundation.org.
PRI, Public Radio International.
Good afternoon, happy Monday. All things considered coming up in just a moment. Here on South Florida's NPLR news station, 91.3 WLRN HD1, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, the Palm Beaches, at 91.5 WKWM, HD1, Marathon and Key West. Great to have you along. I'm Andy Wagner. And ahead with All Things Considered, frustrated voters turn out at a non-partisan political convention in New Hampshire.